That's extortion. No, I said calmly into my phone at 3:47 in the morning. That's $2,250 per hour. You have about 30 seconds to decide before I hang up and go back to sleep. 3 months ago, they fired me to cut costs. Tonight, every single system in their company was dead, completely frozen. They were losing millions of dollars every hour. And I was the only person on Earth who knew how to fix it. My name is Thea Lindqvist, and this is the story of how 7 years of being undervalued turned into one very expensive lesson for them. The stories shared here come from real workplace experiences, though details have been adapted for privacy. Welcome to the Payback Office channel, where professional karma finds its way home. The situations explored here reflect the complicated reality of modern workplace dynamics, where standing up for yourself sometimes means knowing when to walk away and when to come back on your own terms. If workplace justice resonates with you, hitting that subscribe button helps this community grow. The goal is reaching 8,000 subscribers who believe in professional dignity. Every subscription represents someone who knows their worth. The button is right there whenever it feels right. Let me take you back to where this really started. For 7 years, I served as the lead systems architect at Horizon Financial Technologies. My parents raised me in a 2-bedroom apartment where my mother worked double shifts as a nurse and my father drove trucks cross-country. They taught me that empathy wasn't weakness, that understanding people's struggles made you stronger, not softer. Those lessons shaped everything about how I approached both my work and my relationships. Nobody tells you that building something from nothing creates a bond stronger than almost anything else in your professional life. That's what I did at Horizon. When I started, they were running operations on outdated legacy systems that crashed twice a week. The infrastructure was held together with hope and hastily written patches. Within my first year, I designed and implemented an entirely new architecture. Custom protocols, proprietary routing systems, database structures so specifically tailored to their needs that off-the-shelf solutions couldn't come close. I didn't just write code, I created an ecosystem. Every morning for 7 years, I arrived before anyone else. The quiet hours between 6 and 9 were when I did my best work. The building was silent except for the hum of servers and the clicking of my keyboard. I'd walk through the data center sometimes, hand trailing along the cool metal of the server racks, checking temperature gauges and status lights. Other people saw equipment. I saw something I'd built with my own hands and mind. My team grew from just me to 14 people. I hired every single one of them personally. I looked for specific qualities beyond technical skills: curiosity, persistence, the ability to see problems as puzzles rather than obstacles. We became close, the way people do when they're building something meaningful together. Late nights debugging became bonding experiences. Pizza at midnight while tracing an elusive error through thousands of lines of code. The shared triumph when everything finally clicked into place. Jackson was my senior database administrator, a quiet guy from Portland who could spot data inconsistencies like some people spot typos. Absolutely brilliant with optimization. We'd spent countless hours together restructuring query processes, shaving milliseconds off response times that added up to hours of improved performance across the system. Alongside him was Maya, my network security specialist, who had this uncanny ability to think like a hacker. She'd probe our defenses relentlessly, always finding the one vulnerability nobody else had considered. She was the reason our security was nearly impenetrable. Then there was Oliver, my lead developer, who wrote the cleanest code I'd ever seen. No unnecessary lines, no bloated functions, everything elegant and purposeful. He understood the architecture almost as well as I did. The rest of the team each brought their own expertise. Together, we didn't just maintain systems, we continuously evolved them, always improving, always adapting to new challenges. But I made sure certain knowledge stayed with me alone. Not out of malice or possessiveness, it was strategic. In technology, the person who holds the keys holds the power. I documented everything meticulously: maintenance procedures, troubleshooting protocols, system architecture diagrams. The documentation library I created was comprehensive enough that any competent IT professional could handle day-to-day operations. But the core systems, the foundational architecture, the specific initialization sequences required to bring everything online from a cold start, those details lived in my head and in encrypted files that only I could access. I called it professional insurance. For 6.5 years, that insurance seemed unnecessary. My relationship with management was solid. The CTO, Walter Hastings, had hired me personally. He understood technology in a way that many executives didn't. Our meetings were collaborative rather than confrontational. He gave me the budget I needed, the autonomy I requested, and the trust that allowed me to do my best work. The company thrived. Our systems handled transaction volumes that would have brought the old infrastructure to its knees. Downtime became virtually non-existent. Other departments started using our stability as a benchmark. The sales team promised 99.9% uptime to clients, and we delivered. Then Walter retired. His replacement was Damian Cross, brought in from a consulting background rather than technology. That should have been my first warning sign. Damian spent his first month conducting efficiency reviews, which seemed to consist primarily of questioning why we needed so many people doing things he didn't understand. He didn't visit the data center. He didn't ask about the architecture. He didn't want to understand what we'd built or how it worked. He looked at spreadsheets and saw salary expenses. He looked at our team and saw overhead. Our first meeting was telling. "Thea, I've been reviewing the IT budget," he said, barely looking up from his laptop. "The numbers seem high for what is essentially maintenance work." "We're not doing maintenance," I explained carefully. "We're running continuous development and security operations. The threat landscape evolves daily. We're also in the middle of scaling for the new client base from the Apex acquisition." "Right, but couldn't we outsource most of this? There are firms that specialize in managed IT services. Probably cut costs by 40%. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Our systems are custom-built. They're not standard commercial platforms that outside firms would be familiar with. How custom can they really be? Code is code, right? Anyone who actually understood technology would never say that. Code is not just code any more than buildings are just buildings. A custom-designed skyscraper requires knowledge that a strip mall contractor doesn't have. "I'd be happy to walk you through the architecture," I offered. "Once you see how the components integrate, the necessity of in-house expertise becomes clear." "I'm sure it does," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Send me a summary, keep it high level. I don't need technical details." That was exactly the problem. The technical details were what mattered. Over the following months, the atmosphere changed. Damian brought in external consultants to assess our operations. These consultants knew enterprise systems, the big commercial platforms that most companies used. They'd walk through our data center with clipboards, nodding and taking notes, fundamentally misunderstanding what they were looking at. Their report recommended modernization and streamlining. They suggested migrating to cloud services and reducing headcount by 60%. The fact that our custom systems couldn't simply be lifted and shifted to generic cloud infrastructure didn't seem to concern them. They saw obstacles as excuses rather than technical realities. I pushed back hard. I provided documentation. I created presentations showing the cost analysis of migration versus current operations. I demonstrated that while our approach required more specialized personnel, it delivered better performance at a lower total cost than comparable commercial solutions. For a while, I thought I was getting through. Then came the restructuring announcement. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. The calendar invitation simply said organizational update with no additional details. The entire company assembled in the main conference room, people standing along the walls when the seats filled up. Damian stood at the front with Hugo Brennan, the CEO, beside him. Hugo looked uncomfortable, which should have told me everything. "We're evolving to meet the challenges of tomorrow," Damian began, his voice carrying that particular cadence of corporate speak that means nothing good. "This evolution requires us to make strategic changes to our operational structure." Translation: people were losing their jobs. We've decided to partner with Titanium Solutions for our IT infrastructure needs. They're industry leaders in managed technology services and will be taking over our systems operations. My heart started pounding. Jackson caught my eye from across the room, his expression mirroring my own shock. This transition will involve some organizational changes. We're grateful for the contributions of our current IT team, but we'll be moving in a different direction. The rest of the meeting was details about severance packages and transition timelines. My ears were ringing too loudly to absorb most of it. After the general announcement, individual meetings were scheduled. Mine was last, at the end of the day. Damien sat across from me in his office, with the HR director, a woman named Colette whom I'd barely interacted with, present as a witness. "Thea, I want to be direct with you," Damien said. "Your role is no longer needed in our new operational structure." 7 years. 7 years of building, creating, improving. 7 years of early mornings and late nights. 7 years of problem-solving and innovation, reduced to no longer needed in a single sentence. "I see," I said, keeping my voice level, "and the transition plan for the systems." Titanium Solutions will be handling that. They're very experienced. With custom proprietary systems. They've assured us they can manage any enterprise infrastructure. They were wrong, but explaining that now wouldn't change anything. The decision was made. "You'll have 4 weeks, Colette added, her tone sympathetic but professional. "We're hoping you'll use that time to help with knowledge transfer." 4 weeks to transfer 7 years of specialized knowledge to people who didn't understand what questions to ask. "There will be a generous severance package," Damien continued. 6 months' salary, extended health care, strong references. "We value what you've built here, Thea. This isn't personal. It's just the direction the company needs to go." It's never personal when it's happening to you. Somehow it always feels that way anyway. Walking out of that office, I felt numb. Not angry yet, that would come later. Just hollow. The hallway back to my desk felt longer than usual. People's eyes followed me, the news already spreading through the whisper network that exists in every office. Jackson was waiting by my desk. "Tell me it's not true." "It's true." "This is insane. They can't just..." He stopped, running his hand through his hair. "What about the systems? What about everything you built?" "Apparently Titanium Solutions has it covered." His laugh was bitter. Titanium Solutions couldn't find their way around our architecture with a map and a guide. He wasn't wrong. I'd heard of them, a perfectly competent firm for standard commercial systems. But competent with standard systems doesn't translate to competent with custom architecture built from the ground up. The next 4 weeks were surreal. The team from Titanium Solutions arrived in expensive suits and confident attitudes. There were 3 of them initially: Wesley, the lead consultant who spoke primarily in buzzwords; Fiona, a systems analyst who seemed more interested in networking with company executives than understanding our infrastructure; and Todd, actually a capable technician, though his expertise was in completely different platforms. "If you could just walk us through the basics," Wesley said during our first meeting, laptop open and ready to take notes. So I did. I showed them the documentation library. I explained the high-level architecture. I walked them through the network topology, the database structures, the application layers. Todd asked good questions. He was actually trying to understand. Fiona mostly nodded while checking her phone. Wesley kept interrupting to tell me how they'd handled similar situations at other clients, apparently not noticing that our situation wasn't similar. What I didn't show them were the deeper layers, the initialization protocols, the specific boot sequences required for the core servers, the failsafe systems I'd built in, the encryption keys for critical configuration files. "Where's the documentation for the startup procedures?" Todd asked during week 2. "In the secured documentation vault," I said, which was true. What I didn't mention was that the vault required biometric authentication keyed to my fingerprint, with a secondary password known only to me. "Can you give us access?" "Absolutely. I'll need to get approval from Damien to transfer administrative credentials to outside consultants. I said it knowing that Damien, for all his faults, was paranoid about security credentials. He'd want legal to review. Legal would take weeks. By the time they sorted out the approvals, I'd be gone. Was it petty? Maybe. But watching them swagger in, treating 7 years of my life's work as something they could absorb in a 4-week crash course, had shifted my numbness into something sharper. My team was devastated. Most of them were also being let go, kept on just long enough to facilitate the transition before their own terminations took effect. We'd go to lunch together. These awkward, sad meals where everyone pretended things would be fine while knowing they wouldn't be. You could tank this, Maya said during one lunch in the 3rd week. You know you could, just don't give them the keys. They'd sue me into oblivion. Would they? For what? Not giving them something that's not in your contract to provide. She had a point. I'd reviewed my employment contract carefully. It specified that I would maintain systems and provide documentation according to standard professional practices, which I had. The documentation existed, that it was secured, and that only I had access wasn't technically a violation. I'm not trying to sabotage them, I said. I'm just not going out of my way to make it easy. Oliver leaned forward. What happens when they try to cold start the system? Cold start? Bringing the entire infrastructure online from a completely powered-down state. It almost never happened. We had redundancies and failovers specifically to avoid ever needing to do a cold start. But if it did happen, they'd need the initialization sequences, I said carefully, and the master encryption keys, and the specific order of operations for bringing the database clusters online. Which are where? In my head and in the secured vault. Jackson smiled for the first time in weeks. You're a genius. I'm just thorough. My last day arrived faster than expected and slower than I wanted. The office threw a perfunctory goodbye gathering, cake in the break room, a generic card signed by people who barely knew me, awkward small talk about staying in touch. Damien made an appearance. We really appreciate everything you've done, Thea. You've built something impressive here. Just not impressive enough to keep me employed. I hope the transition goes smoothly, I said, and meant it more ironically than he realized. Walter, my old CTO, showed up unexpectedly. He'd retired to Florida but happened to be in town. We spoke in a quiet corner while the party continued without us. This is wrong, he said bluntly. Hugo should have fought harder. It's done. You know they're going to struggle without you. Probably. He studied me for a moment. You've secured the core documentation. It wasn't a question. Walter knew how I worked. Everything is properly documented and stored according to professional standards, I said carefully. He almost smiled. Of course it is, and access to that storage will require proper authorization transfers, which Damien is dragging his feet on because he doesn't trust outside consultants with security credentials. That's not my problem anymore. Now he did smile. No, I suppose it isn't. We talked for a while longer, about his retirement, about the industry, about everything except what we were both thinking. When he left, he shook my hand and said quietly, sometimes the best revenge is letting people face the natural consequences of their decisions. My desk was already cleared out. I'd been removing personal items gradually over the past weeks. There wasn't much left. A few photos, a coffee mug, a small plant that Jackson promised to take care of. 7 years reduced to a cardboard box that wasn't even full. The walk to my car was lonely. It was late afternoon, the parking lot mostly empty. I loaded the box into my trunk and sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, looking back at the building. I'd given this place so much. Early mornings and late nights. Weekends when critical updates needed implementation. Vacations cut short for emergencies. My expertise, my creativity, my dedication. And it had taken about 15 minutes for them to decide I was disposable. I drove home, opened a bottle of wine, and started planning my next move. The job market for someone with my specialized skills was actually pretty good. Within 2 weeks, I had 3 interviews lined up. Within a month, I had 2 offers. I accepted a position at Quantum Analytics, a growing fintech company that actually appreciated custom solutions and the people who could build them. The pay was better, the leadership was sharper, and nobody looked at me like I was a line item to be optimized away. Life moved on. I stopped thinking about Horizon every day, then every week. The bitterness faded into something more like disappointed acceptance. Then came the phone call at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I didn't recognize the number, but answered anyway in that panicked half-awake way when middle-of-the-night calls usually mean emergencies. "Thea, it's Todd, from Titanium Solutions." It took my sleep-fogged brain a moment to place him. "Todd, it's almost 4 in the morning." "I know, I'm sorry, I didn't know who else to call. We have a massive problem." I sat up suddenly more awake. What kind of problem? The power company did planned maintenance on the grid overnight. Everything shut down, all of it. When we tried to bring the systems back online, he sounded genuinely panicked. "Nothing's working. Every startup procedure we try fails. We've been at this for 6 hours. The entire company is dead in the water. They're losing millions every hour this continues. 6 months ago, this call would have sent me racing to fix things. 6 months ago, these were my systems, my responsibility, my problem to solve. Now..." "That sounds serious," I said carefully. "Have you checked the documentation?" "We can't access the core documentation. It's in some secured vault that requires your credentials." "Did you request administrative transfer?" Damien kept delaying it, said it wasn't urgent, and now you need it. "Thea, I know how you left. I know this isn't your problem anymore, but thousands of people depend on these systems. Clients, employees." He wasn't wrong about that. The people who would suffer from extended downtime weren't the executives who'd made the decision to let me go. They were regular employees who'd lose work. Clients who relied on the services. None of them had anything to do with Damien's cost-cutting. But they also weren't my responsibility anymore. "Todd, I appreciate the difficult position you're in, but I haven't worked at Horizon for 3 months. I have a new job, new responsibilities. I can't just drop everything to fix their problems." "I understand, I do. But please, is there anything you can tell me, any guidance?" "Everything you need is in the documentation vault. Get Damien to authorize the credential transfer, access the vault, and follow the initialization protocols exactly as written. That could take days to get through legal and security approvals." Yes, it could have. 3 months ago, when I offered to set it up as part of the transition, and Damien declined. There was a long pause. He really messed up, didn't he? "That's not for me to say. Good luck, Todd." I hung up and lay back down, but sleep didn't come. I stared at the ceiling, feeling a complicated mixture of satisfaction and guilt. The satisfaction felt earned. This was exactly the scenario I'd imagined, proof that I hadn't been exaggerating the complexity of what I'd built or the necessity of specialized knowledge. But the guilt nagged at me too. People were suffering because the systems were down, not just Damien, not just the executives, real people doing real jobs. My phone rang again 20 minutes later. Damien this time. "Thea, we need your help." No greeting, no acknowledgement that he'd terminated me, just immediate demand. "Hello, Damien. Todd said you spoke. He explained the situation. We need you to walk us through the startup procedures." "Those procedures are in the secured documentation vault, which we can't access." "That's unfortunate." "Thea, I don't have time for games. Tell me what we need to know." The entitled tone in his voice ignited something sharp in my chest. "I'm not playing games. I properly secured all critical documentation before I left. The access protocols require authorization transfers that you chose not to complete. Because you were deliberately obstructing the transition. I offered multiple times to set up proper access transfers. You declined, saying it wasn't urgent. That was your decision. This is sabotage. This is the natural consequence of inadequate transition planning. Everything you need is documented. You just need to follow the procedures to access it. Those procedures take time we don't have. Then I suggest you start them immediately, rather than continuing this call. We're prepared to bring you back as a consultant. Standard emergency rates. You come in, fix this, and we'll compensate you appropriately. 6 months ago, hearing them admit they needed me might have felt validating. Now it just felt hollow. What's the rate? $200 an hour. I almost laughed. My normal consulting rate is $500 an hour. For emergency after-hours work, it's triple. For former employers who terminated me, add another 50% premium. That's over $2,000 an hour. Yes. That's extortion. That's the market rate for specialized expertise in emergency situations. You're welcome to find someone else who knows your systems as well as I do. I paused. Oh, wait, you can't, because you fired that person. Thea. Those are my terms, take them or leave them. Either way, I'm going back to sleep. I hung up before he could respond. The phone rang again immediately. I turned it off. When I turned my phone back on at 7 a.m., there were 43 missed calls and 27 text messages, most from Damien and Todd, several from my former team members, 2 from Hugo, the CEO. I called Hugo back first. Thea, thank God, he sounded exhausted. Have you talked to Damien? Briefly, he didn't like my consulting terms. What are your terms? I told him. There was a long pause. That's expensive. That's appropriate for the situation. You know we're losing exponentially more than that every hour the systems are down. Then my rates should be very acceptable. Another pause. You're angry, you have every right to be. The decision to restructure it was made over my objections. That was interesting, was it? Walter warned me before he retired. He said Damien didn't understand what you'd built. I should have listened. Yes, you should have. If I agree to your rates, will you help? This was the moment, the decision point. I could help and collect a substantial consulting fee. Or I could refuse and let them struggle, proving a point but potentially harming innocent people in the process. I'll help, I said. But I need the terms in writing from legal before I set foot in that building. Contract for emergency consulting services at the rates I specified, payment guaranteed regardless of how long the work takes, and a clause that this constitutes a one-time engagement with no expectation of ongoing relationship. Done, I'll have legal draw it up immediately. How soon can you be here? Once I have the signed contract, 2 hours. Thea, thank you. Don't thank me yet. You're about to get a very expensive invoice. The contract arrived in my email 90 minutes later. I had my attorney review it quickly. One benefit of having been terminated was I'd already established a relationship with an employment lawyer. She approved, I signed, and I drove to Horizon. The parking lot was chaos. Cars everywhere, people clustered in anxious groups. Through the windows, the normally bustling office space looked dead, dark monitors, silent phones, people standing around helplessly. Security let me in immediately. Apparently I was expected. The data center was crowded with people who shouldn't be there. Executives and consultants standing around while Todd and a few technicians I didn't recognize tried various approaches to bring systems online. Everyone out except technical staff, I said from the doorway. Damien turned. He looked like he hadn't slept, his normally perfect appearance rumpled and exhausted. Thea. Everyone out, I can't work with people hovering. Hugo, who was also there, nodded. You heard her, let's give them space. The room cleared until it was just me, Todd, and the other technicians. Okay, I said, show me what you've tried. Todd walked me through their attempts. They'd managed to get power to the servers, but couldn't get past the initialization phase. The core databases wouldn't mount. The application layers couldn't authenticate. The network routing was completely confused. It was actually worse than I'd expected. In their panic, they'd tried forcing various processes, which had created cascading errors throughout the system. You've basically tied everything in knots, I said. Can you untie them? Yes, but we need to do a complete reset and initialization from scratch. That means following a very specific sequence, and it's going to take time. How much time? If everything goes smoothly, 12 hours. If we hit complications, could be twice that. Todd looked sick. They're going to lose millions. They were going to lose millions anyway. At least this way, they'll eventually get the systems back. I pulled up a terminal and entered my credentials for the secured vault. The biometric scanner accepted my fingerprint, and after a complex password, the documentation opened. The initialization protocols were exactly where I'd left them. Detailed, step-by-step procedures for bringing the entire infrastructure online from a cold start. I'd written them years ago and updated them regularly, but never actually needed to use them because we designed the redundancies to prevent this exact scenario. Here's what we're going to do, I said, pulling up the procedures on a large monitor. I'll handle the core systems. Todd, you coordinate the application layer. You too, I pointed at the other technicians, monitor these specific processes and alert me to any errors immediately. They nodded, grateful to have clear direction. I started with the foundational layer, the core servers that everything else depended on. The boot sequence had to happen in a precise order, each component initializing fully before the next could start. It was like conducting an orchestra, where every instrument had to come in at exactly the right moment. The first server came online cleanly. Good start. The second one threw an error. Not unexpected, this was one of the complications I'd anticipated. The system clocks had desynchronized during the shutdown, and the authentication protocols were rejecting the timing mismatch. I ran the time synchronization protocol I'd written for exactly this scenario. 5 minutes later, the second server initialized. Then the third, fourth, fifth. The database clusters were the tricky part. They had to come online simultaneously and immediately begin their synchronization protocols. Too much delay, and they'd assume data corruption and lock everything down as a safety measure. Todd, I need you ready on the application authentication services. When I give the word, you've got a 90-second window to initialize them. 90 seconds. 89 now, be ready. The database clusters started their initialization. I watched the synchronization progress, waiting for the exact right moment. Now, Todd executed his sequence. I could see his hands shaking slightly as he typed, but he got it done. 73 seconds. The databases came fully online, green lights across the board. Next were the network routing protocols. This was where my custom architecture really showed its complexity. Standard routing wouldn't handle the transaction volumes and security requirements, so I'd built a hybrid system that dynamically adjusted based on load and threat assessment. Bringing it online required initializing multiple components in parallel while maintaining specific timing relationships between them. It was the most technically demanding part of the whole process. I opened 6 terminal windows and started running sequences across all of them, fingers moving faster than conscious thought, muscle memory, from 7 years of working with these systems taking over. One of the technicians was watching over my shoulder. How are you doing that? Practice. The routing layer came online. Traffic started flowing. I could see the pathways lighting up on the network visualization, data beginning to move through the system like blood through veins. Application layers next, I said. Todd, you're up again. We worked through each application systematically. Customer-facing services, internal tools, data analytics platforms, security monitoring. Each one had dependencies that had to be satisfied before initialization. Each one had specific configuration requirements. Hours passed. I lost track of time, focused entirely on the systems. Someone brought food. I ate without tasting it. Someone asked questions. I answered without looking away from the monitors. The work had a rhythm to it, almost meditative despite the complexity. This was what I was good at. This was what I'd spent 7 years mastering. And despite everything that had happened, despite the anger and the hurt and the betrayal, there was something deeply satisfying about doing this work well. Around hour 9, we hit a major complication. One of the storage arrays wasn't responding correctly. The hardware seemed fine, but the software layer was rejecting initialization commands. Todd looked panicked. What do we do? I ran diagnostics, tracing through the error logs. There, A corrupted configuration file, probably damaged when they tried to force processes earlier. We need to rebuild the configuration from backup, I said. Which means taking this entire storage cluster offline, rebuilding it, then resynchronizing with the rest of the array. How long? 2 hours, maybe 3. Will the system stay stable while we do that? If we're careful. We were careful. The rebuild process was nerve-wracking, watching terabytes of data verify and sync, any error potentially causing catastrophic data loss. But the backup systems I'd implemented years ago worked exactly as designed, and slowly, meticulously, the storage array came back online. 14 hours after I'd started, the last system initialized successfully. Every light green, every process running, every application responding. The entire infrastructure was online and stable. Todd actually hugged me. You did it, you actually did it. We did it, I corrected, though we both knew the truth. I called Hugo. Systems are online. You'll want to run verification processes on all critical data, but everything appears stable. Thea, I don't know how to thank you. The invoice will be sufficient, thanks. I could hear the wince in his voice. About that. $2,200 per hour for 14 hours, plus expenses. The contract was very clear. Yes, of course, legal will process it immediately. I hung up and started packing up my things. The technicians were running their verification procedures, but they didn't need me for that. My work here was done. Damien appeared in the doorway as I was heading out. You saved us, he said. I fixed the problem you created. That's not entirely fair. I stopped and looked at him directly. You fired the person who built these systems because you thought they were too expensive to maintain. You brought in people who didn't understand the architecture because they were cheaper. You ignored warnings about the transition complexity because you thought you knew better. And when it all collapsed, you had to pay me more in 1 day than you would have spent in 6 months of my salary. Which part of that is unfair? He didn't have an answer. I hope the cost savings were worth it, I said and walked out. The invoice I sent 3 days later totaled $30,800 for 14 hours of work, plus expenses. Legal processed it without argument. The check arrived by courier within a week. I deposited it and tried to move on with my life. But the story didn't end there. 2 weeks after the emergency fix, Jackson called me. He'd been let go as scheduled and was job hunting, but he still had friends at Horizon who kept him updated. You're not going to believe this, he said. They fired Damien. Really? Hugo presented the board with the full accounting of the outage. Lost revenue, emergency consulting fees, reputation damage with clients. It added up to over $3 million in total impact. The board asked Damien to explain how restructuring it had saved the company money. What did he say? Apparently nothing convincing. They terminated him yesterday. I felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it was muted. Damien losing his job didn't undo my losing mine. It didn't give me back those 7 years of investment in a company that had discarded me. There's more, Jackson continued. Hugo wants to talk to you about coming back. That surprised me, as what? He wouldn't say, just asked if I could pass along the message that he'd like to meet with you. No pressure, no expectations, just a conversation. I thought about it for a few days before agreeing to meet. Curiosity more than any real interest in returning. We met at a coffee shop near Horizon's office. Hugo looked better than during the crisis, rested, more composed. Thank you for meeting me, he said. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I would either. I want to apologize, personally and on behalf of the company. What happened to you was wrong. The decision to restructure it was made for all the wrong reasons, and ignoring your expertise was inexcusable. I appreciate that. We've terminated the contract with Titanium Solutions. We're rebuilding the internal IT department, and I'd like you to lead it. There it was, the offer I might have wanted 3 months ago. As what? Vice President of Technology. Full executive authority over all IT operations and architecture, budget control, hiring authority, a seat at the table for all major company decisions. It was a significant promotion from where I'd been before. The kind of role that would have been my 5-year goal under normal circumstances. What's the compensation? He slid a paper across the table with a number that made my eyebrows rise. That's substantial. It reflects the value you bring and the mistakes we made in not recognizing that earlier. I sipped my coffee thinking, what about the rest of my team? Jackson, Maya, Oliver, the people who were let go. If they're interested in returning, we'd welcome them back, with raises and apologies. What happens the next time someone like Damien decides it is too expensive? The next time someone questions IT investment, they'll be questioned by a VP with executive authority who reports directly to me. And I'll back you completely. It was a good offer, more than fair, the kind of opportunity that doesn't come along often. But something had changed in me during those months away. The betrayal of being terminated had shifted my perspective. I'd spent 7 years building something for Horizon, pouring myself into their success, tying my identity to their systems. And they'd thrown it away in a 15-minute meeting. At Quantum Analytics, I was building something too. But I was building it with clearer boundaries, with better protections, with the wisdom that came from learning hard lessons. I appreciate the offer, I said finally, truly, but I'm going to decline. Hugo looked disappointed but not surprised. Can I ask why? Because I've moved on. I'm doing good work at a company that valued me from day one. Coming back here, even in a better role, would always carry the weight of what happened. I don't want that. I understand. I'm disappointed, but I understand. However, I continued, I'd be willing to consult on rebuilding the IT department. Help you hire the right leader, design the proper structure, ensure you don't end up in this situation again. His face brightened. That would be incredibly valuable. At my standard consulting rates, not the emergency rates. He smiled. That seems fair. We shook hands, and I felt something release in my chest. Closure, maybe, or just the satisfaction of knowing I was making the choice on my terms this time. Over the next 3 months, I consulted with Horizon on their IT rebuild. I helped them hire a new CTO, a sharp woman named Adrienne who actually understood systems architecture and had the backbone to push back against short-sighted cost-cutting. I convinced Jackson, Maya, and Oliver to return, negotiating strong compensation packages and protections for all of them. They deserved to continue working with the systems they'd helped build if they wanted to. I documented everything that had only lived in my head, creating comprehensive guides that would outlive any single person's tenure. Not because I trusted Horizon more, but because I wanted my former team to have the tools they needed to succeed. And when the consulting engagement ended, I walked away for the second time. But this time, it felt different. This time, I was leaving on my terms, with my head high, having proven my value beyond any doubt. The final check from Horizon for the consulting work cleared my account on a Friday afternoon. I looked at the total amount I'd earned from them since being terminated, the emergency fix, the consulting engagement, all of it together, and realized it was more than I would have made in a full year of my old salary. Maya called that evening. We did the official relaunch of the systems today with the new architecture Adrienne approved. Everything went perfectly. Everyone knows it's because of the foundation you built. You helped build it too. Yeah, but we both know it was your vision. Your design, we just helped implement it. How does it feel being back? Good, actually. Different than before, but good. Adrienne listens. The new structure protects us. And honestly, having you come back as a consultant and advocate for us meant everything. After we hung up, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, thinking about the strange journey of the past 6 months. Getting fired had felt like the worst thing that could happen, like a rejection of everything I'd worked for, and in some ways it was. But it had also freed me from tying my worth to a single company's perception of my value. It had taught me to protect my interests and advocate for proper compensation. It had shown me that the skills I'd developed were valuable far beyond one organization. Most importantly, it had taught me that building something meaningful is important. but building it in a place that values you is even more important. My phone buzzed with an email. Quantum Analytics, asking if I'd be interested in leading a new initiative building systems architecture for a major expansion. The kind of opportunity that excited me, with a company that had proven they valued my expertise. I smiled and started typing my response. The best revenge isn't destruction. It's not even proving people wrong, though that has its satisfactions. The best revenge is building something better, somewhere else, and being happy while doing it. And that's exactly what I did. If this story resonated with your own workplace experiences, consider subscribing. Building a community of professionals who understand their worth is what this channel is all about. The journey to 8,000 subscribers continues, and each person who joins represents someone who refuses to settle for less than they deserve. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next story.